Today's topic has taken me a long time to put together because honestly, I had dismissed it as something that I'll probably never get around to because it's a subject that I think needs to be handled with absolute care. And I just didn't feel like I knew how to do that myself. So, what I'm going to do instead is read a synopsis generated on the topic, and from there, I'll feed any opinion, any thought, any experience that I may have had. But I think I'll limit it to just expressing the information. And of course, you guys can draw your own conclusions, but these are historical facts, and you just determine whether you feel that is a thing that was necessary back in its time, or if it's a thing that you think will never stop. And I think in order for us to progress, there need to be certain sacrifices to be made. When a topic like this is being discussed, the hardest part for me is to think about those times as if I were living through those times. Because I don't think it's fair that I'll sit here and judge by my modern values and standards stuff from the past. Even if that past was not even that distant, it hasn't even been 100 years. But I'm just saying, even historical stuff like the conquest of America and stuff like that, I still think that you have to think about what life was like in those times and not judge them from your modern views. So, with that said, just so you know, this topic will be about animals that were used for the advancement of science. And for me, this is a sensitive topic because anything that has to do with taking advantage of a creature, it doesn't have to be limited to just a human, but a creature at all to be taken advantage of and them being in a vulnerable state, that always is a sensitive fiber for me. I'm not sure why, but it's sometimes hard for me to talk about. But anyway, I'll bring you the story of two animals that I had heard about a long time ago, but I forgot about. And I think I forgot about them because I never really had them present in my mind. And when I heard of what happened, I found out the details that I'm about to share, but I still felt like, I guess I was too afraid to dig up more. So I limited myself to these two stories. And it just so happened that recently someone mentioned one of them, and I said, oh, right, that is a thing. So, anyway, let's begin. So, the first story I wish to share is about Félicette. She was a female cat from Paris, France. She is one cat that goes down in history as the only cat to have ever been out in space. On October 18, 1963, she was launched into space aboard a Veronique AG-1 rocket. The flight was suborbital, lasting about 15 minutes. She reached an altitude of nearly 100 miles and experienced about 5 minutes of weightlessness. Of course, I'm imagining it's 100 miles into the atmosphere, which sometimes, when I try to think about how high the atmosphere is, I think if planes cruise at 30,000 feet, to convert that into miles is kind of hard for me because I don't visualize it that way. And you look at the sky and you see planes at cruising altitude and you think, okay, that's high, but there is such thing as higher, and most of us will never experience that. The purpose of this mission was part of France's space program to study the effects of space travel on living organisms, particularly the brain's response to weightlessness and G-forces. Félicette's capsule was safely recovered, and she was the only one of the 14 cats trained for the program to survive the flight. After her return, she was kept for a few months before being euthanized so scientists could study the electrodes implanted in her brain. And there is a photo that I am going to attach of her. And if you look at that photo, you can see the stitching going on in her head already. And something about seeing that is very shocking to me because it confirms that this was real. This is a thing that really happened, and animal was used for that stuff. And sometimes I wonder about when you're in a vulnerable state, say this was a stray cat, even cats who have owners, sometimes they have owners that are not good for them. But you know, that pet still had a home. These stray cats, I guess you would look at them and see them as well. They were out here in the wild, but the wild being a city, it's a human wilderness. You may look at them as well, they're not serving a person, they're not serving a human. Therefore, it's as if you act toward them like nobody's gonna miss them. And sometimes when I think of stray animals, I think of them as well. If they're able to live for as long as they live, it's because they have instincts and they have a degree of fitness, and you have to be astute to live out there in the wild. But it's weird to me how you observe a stray animal and you can think about just picking them up and think about experimenting on them. And like I said, it's experimentation on a living organism so we can learn about what it does to us as living organisms. But sometimes when it comes to sacrificing people or things in the name of advancing science because the greater good is what's at stake here, greater learning, greater knowledge, I still think we need a solution for how you decide who gets this done to when they're not volunteers. If you collect some humans who volunteer for something, then I think that's different. I don't think it's right still to submit someone to something that's experimental. And maybe you won't know how they'll respond and you may not have a solution to save them. But I think if you can converse with someone and tell them the terms and conditions and they still roll with it, that's different. But when you're picking up an animal who you don't have a common language with and they have no idea what's coming, I think that is unnecessary cruelty. So, if anything, experimentation for the purposes of science should be limited to humans. I don't know who out there volunteers for this stuff because we also got to consider that it's possible that, say, poor people are more likely to indulge in this type of thing because they may be promised financial compensation, and that is the hope that they have to help their families progress financially. So there's still a degree of exploitation going on. There's the exploitation of an animal you can't reason with and consult and orient about what's coming, but there's also the human who can process all that, but more than likely it'll be an individual who doesn't have a lot going for them, who may be out of desperation because they're in a vulnerable place in their lives, they may agree to such thing. So I think it's still complicated. Her story was largely overshadowed by other space animals, and she was often mistakenly referred to as a male cat named Felix. I don't remember the story of Felix. A campaign started in 2017 to give her the recognition she deserved. In 2019, a bronze statue of Felicette was unveiled at the International Space University in France. And I don't know about you guys, but to me, submitting an animal like that for experimentation is disgusting. It's human cruelty toward other living beings. And as humans, we are able to be cruel to one another. Therefore, this doesn't surprise me, and I hate that it doesn't surprise me. But I'm just saying that we as humans, there needs to come a point when we can do better. We just couldn't continue to live our lives justifying the heinous acts we perform as this is progress. We gotta accept that something is just wrong And I think this is one of them. Now, the second one I wish to discuss here is the story of Laika. Laika was a small mixed breed dog, a stray from the streets of Moscow, who became known worldwide after being selected for the Soviet Union space program. The Soviet space scientists, under the direction of Sergei Korolev, were looking for dogs that could endure the harsh conditions of space travel. Laika was chosen due to her calm temperament, small size, and ability to adapt to the training conditions. You mean to tell me you didn't want to try this with an angry dog who would probably chew your hand out? Laika and the other dogs underwent rigorous training to prepare for space travel. This included being placed in progressively smaller cages to acclimate to the spacecraft's confines, wearing space suits similar to what they would wear in space, experiencing centrifuge tests to simulate the intense G forces of rocket launch, being exposed to loud noises similar to those they would encounter during launch. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if you have ever been in a vehicle that is speeding very intensely, that stuff can shock you at first because you are not used to that pull. You haven't experienced that before. And at least you get acclimated because you have the environment supporting you. That environment was strategically developed for travel. Say, if you're in a train and it starts moving crazy, you have things you can hang on to, you can be seated. All those things have been placed there for comfort and safety. But when you are being used to develop those things, it's completely different. But in this instance, we're talking about preparing you for something that masses won't really experience. And you are the first generation of creatures going through this. To be placed on a centrifuge, that thing that's spinning and it's violent, and you feel your organs, your stomach all over, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, and you don't know when it's stopping, if it's stopping, and you're also wearing things that are attached to you, and you're also exposed to loud noises, which I don't know about you guys, but to me, loud noises are one of my biggest stressors. I don't like crowds for that reason because I don't like the noise. I don't go to concerts or places that there's going to be a lot of noise because I know how god awful loud noises are. And here we're talking about an animal whose hearing is much more sensitive and advanced than ours. And that is one of the things that you're exposing them to: unnecessary loud noises. And these loud noises are coming from our inventions, but we want them to go through it so that they can prepare. I don't know, you guys. It's just absolutely disgusting cruelty. And as much as I like science and as much as I like learning, I'm just grateful that during our history there have been thinkers, even if people think that degrees like this in the modern days don't have any value. But we have had people historically who take time to exist just thinking about things. And thanks to some of those, we have things like civil rights, and rights for animals have also been achieved. But I'm just saying that if you leave us to our own devices, sometimes I wonder how much people who do these things actually think about how this animal feels, how this living being feels and suffers. Sometimes I think not a lot of thinking takes place. On November 3rd, 1957, Laika was launched into space aboard Sputnik 2. This was not long after the successful launch of Sputnik 1, which was the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. Sputnik 2 was much larger and was designed to carry a living passenger. Initially, the plan was to euthanize Laika with poisoned food after a few days in orbit to prevent suffering from oxygen depletion. However, a malfunction in the thermal control system led to the cabin overheating, causing Laika's death within hours of the flight due to heat stress. Just in case you didn't picture that entirely in your head, she cooked to death. That's what they're saying. Overheated, that machine overheated, she cooked to death. Sputnik 2 completed 2,570 orbits of Earth. The spacecraft did not have the capability to return to Earth. Thus, Laika did not survive the mission. It re-entered the atmosphere in April 1958 and disintegrated. So they deliberately launched this dog into space despite them not having a plan on how to retrieve them. And they were aware of this. I read something about how the researcher or somebody who worked with her, they took the dog to their home so that the kids could play with her because they knew that she wasn't coming back. So they wanted to give her the best day, last day on Earth before submitting them to this, which, I mean, I guess it's a kind-ish gesture, but to me, that elevates the cruelty on the dog because this dog thought that they were going to a permanent home, safe, with kids, being played with after living in the streets so long. And remember, she has a calm temperament anyway, but she couldn't have imagined what was coming. And I'm guessing after all the training she went through, then I'm guessing she had known cruelty and evil, I guess. I just struggle to find the words to describe this. It's so hard for me. And I don't know, you guys. I just hope that one day we can just move on from animal experimentation. Sometimes I see on product labels how not tested on animals, their product was developed. And on some products I see, we tested this on ourselves, not on animals. And I never really think about that. Like, sure, I can imagine animals having soaps on them so that we can study how it irritates their skin and whatnot. But I don't stop to think about it for everything. Everything ever that we may have discovered are hazards, but we didn't need a human to discover the hazard. It was pre-discovered. It was pre-discovered because something else discovered it in our place. Again, they had no idea that was coming. The mission sparked both awe for the technological achievement and criticism regarding the ethics of using animals in such experiments. Like I was saying, some people are going to focus on the fact that, oh wow, we can go into space now. And that was the reality of that decade. This was about advancing. The arms race stuff was going on. And I can understand how back in those days, because we had never explored space nor contemplated the stars like that, but from a first person perspective, the fact that that possibility was emerging, I can understand how you would get lost in that excitement. And it's, like I said, hard to judge those times with modern values now. But that's why in the present, when I hear of new technology coming out, and I seem to have my guard up with it. If the environment is going to pay the consequences for it ever so slightly, I will always object. Because without nature, we don't exist. And I'm not going to allow a temporary advancement, which maybe I won't even be able to indulge in much, to impress me into going crazy and disregarding the damage to the environment. Hopefully that means I have empathy. Hopefully that means that I do care about leaving a planet that's still livable after I'm gone. And hopefully we can all get on the same page about this. It's pretty disturbing to me that we find that acceptable to just, without any regard, develop things, experiment on things, and We are aware of how this is going to stress the environment, but we think that our comfort is the only thing that matters. And that's what I find most disturbing about human behavior. It's that mining mindset. When will it be enough? The Soviet Union initially reported that Laika had lived for several days in space, but the truth about her short lived journey came to light later. Laika became an international symbol of the space race between the USSR and the USA. Her story highlighted both the strides in space exploration and the ethical considerations of animal use in science. Statues and memorials have been erected in her honor, and she is remembered in literature, art, and science education. Laika's mission contributed to the understanding of how living organisms react to space conditions, paving the way for human space flight. The human space flight should have come before the animal flight. Subsequent missions with animals, particularly dogs, were conducted with plans for safe return, learning from Laika's tragic but pioneering journey. Laika's story remains a poignant reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of science and technology, sparking ongoing debates about the ethics of animal testing and space exploration. Again, use a person before you use an animal. But as people who can reason and think and understand what is at stake here, who would voluntarily sign up for that? Especially someone in this society. Like, throw a researcher up there. Sure, we need your mind and your brain and your skill set and your education. But if you want to learn about this and you want to uncover this mystery, you take part in it. And that's the same way I feel about wars. Politicians start this shit. When do they ever gear up to actually go to the front lines? When do they actually undergo the exact military training that those who serve in their armies do? You all suck at diplomacy, I guess, because your personal ambition, quest for power is what matters most. Therefore, as the leader, you have the privilege of being the white collar worker, and then you need soldiers to serve as your blue collar workers. But if you want to be the one to fight, you join the military. So if you want to be the one flying out into space, you fly out into space. So yeah, you guys, that's it from me. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is probably the most disturbing topic I have covered here. And all I have to say is I'm happy to see that in modern days, these debates never die. We still continue to find ways around not using animals, as in practice animal testing before we get around to something. And I think that's the way it should be. If we have this ambition, if this is something that we want, if this is a problem we are inventing, then we are the ones who should suffer first, as opposed to sending another being because we somehow believe that it's all right because I guess they cannot communicate their suffering in a language we understand. Imagine if you sent a human up there and you had radio contact with them and they were describing what you monitored on their devices, like their heart rate and stuff. Imagine if you actually heard a person's agony over the radio describing to you, the cabin is overheating, I can't breathe, or I'm going blind from staring at the lights, at the sun rays, or anything. Or the confinement in this cabin, I can't stretch out my legs, I can't stand up, and biological waste, for instance, I can't access the bathroom. Or physically, after those G-forces, I'm physically exhausted to the point that I can't move my muscles. All that. Like, imagine if you actually had a living being you can comprehend, relay what their experience is. But no, you sent a dog in a vulnerable state. That's why we need debates. That's why we need people who think critically. That's why we need people who question everything, are negative about some things, spend the time dwelling on the actual consequences of something, not just writing off the impression, and people who will find negativity in everything. That is a good thing. It can help slow down some crazy people. It doesn't always work, but at least the question is raised and it presses on people. It presses enough to where one day it's possible to stop doing that. And if we can't stop it, at least that would be events may be halted. I think that's progress. The human being's quest for self destruction and the destruction of others and being parasitic needs to be controlled. And in order for it to be controlled, we need people who can put restraints. It just takes a while. All right, that's it from me. Feel free to leave your thoughts like always. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.